The reading of the Spirits book, question number 5. All human beings have within them the intuitive sentiment of God's existence. What can we conclude from this? The answer, that God exists. Otherwise, where would such a sentiment come from if it were not based on something real? This is an application of the principle that there is no effect without a cause. This is something we can search within us, and I think we all have been into moments in our lives where we cannot understand or we don't have the answer for, and it's natural that we go into something else. The source, God, Allah, anything we call it, that there's something else that we get it from. And that is in an innate feeling because we are the creation of God. Question number 6 in the reading of the Spirits book. Mightn't our inner sentiment about the existence of God be the result of education and the product of acquired ideas? It's interesting to note that Kardec is always checking on the previous question because that's how he built his logic. He's always going to find ways to confirm, so there are many pieces to the puzzle. Right? So we just read about if we are born with this sentiment of God. And now he asks, wouldn't that be the product of our education? The answer, if that were the case, why would members of your primitive cultures have such intuition? And here's the Kardec's explanation. If the sentiment of the existence of a supreme being were only the product of education, it would not be universal. Like all scientific ideas, it would only exist in the minds of those who receive such education. And then again, it's checking in that we can look into many civilizations and into many people. There's always a form of God. Why? Because that's natural to man. Question number 7. Could we find the first cause of the formation of things in the innermost properties of matter? The answer, even if you could, what in turn would be the cause of those properties? There must always be a first cause. Kardec notes, to attribute the first formation of things to the innermost properties of matter would be to mistake the effect for the cause, since such properties are themselves an effect that must have had a prior cause. We always have to get to what caused it. And it's interesting because we see that, there's the Big Bang and there's all these formations of things and what have originated. But the interesting thing about that is the intelligence that's behind it. And I always think of this analogy. If you were to enter a factory that was empty, and you would see the machines are properly organized, and there's a logic between how things are placed, and there's a thought process behind it. Even without seeing anybody around, you would conclude that somebody, an intelligent being, created it by its logic. And if you look at every single detail in our universe, in nature, there's such an incredible amount of intelligence in how our bodies work, in the micro and the great levels, that there's gotta be the cause. Even though, as we said, as Kardec said here in previous questions, a lot of it is beyond our comprehension, but we can conclude that's gotta be a cause, and that cause is God. Question number 8. What about the idea that attributes the first formation of all things to an accidental combination of matter, like chance? The answer, another absurdity. How could anyone with any common sense believe that chance is an intelligent agent? Moreover, what is chance? Nothing. Kardec's notes. The harmony that governs the forces of the universe reveals certain set combinations and designs, and thus an intelligent power. To attribute the first formation of things to chance would be nonsense, because chance is blind and cannot produce intelligent results. An intelligence chance would no longer be chance. I like the word harmony, because if you look into nature, if you look into the universe, we see, of what we know of it, which is very little, we see harmony, we see balance. And by this short time and short period that we human beings have been on this planet, we managed to destroy a lot of it by trying to create something, which shows we are flawed. But God isn't. What He creates, it's balance. It brings harmony. And it's amazing, because the more we learn about how things operate, about the ecosystem we live in, the more we see that harmony, the more we see that wisdom. And even though what Kardec already explained, that we're not capable of understanding God, by understanding His creation, we can conclude His wisdom and His intelligence. Question number 9. Where may we see in the first cause a supreme intelligence superior to all other intelligences? The answer, you have a proverb that says, the workman is known by his work. So look at the work and you will find the workman. Pride is what creates disbelief. Human pride believes in nothing above itself, and that is why people think they are so powerful. Poor beings, a mere breath from God would blow them over. The explanation from Kardec is, we judge the power of an intelligence by its works. Since no human being could create what nature produces, it is obvious that the first cause must be an intelligence superior to humankind. Whatever may be the marvels accomplished by human intelligence, such intelligence itself must have a cause. The greater the results, the greater the first cause must have been. No matter what name you give it, that intelligence is the first cause of all things. It's interesting that, again, Kardec continues to double check, and he continues to follow up on the questions to make sure that the logic still holds true. And it's amazing, because the question was, what is the first cause? And where's the evidence of it? And he said, just look at the work, and by the work you can conclude who created it. And it also alludes to the fact that a lot of time our pride will prevent us from believing into something else, especially something that we can comprehend and something above us. The attributes of the divinity. This is question number 10. And the question is, can human beings fathom God's innermost nature? The answer is a short one. No, they lack the aptitude to comprehend it. It would be quite ambitious of us to try to comprehend God, and I think the answer is pretty clear. No. Question number 11. Will there ever be able to fathom the mystery of the divinity? The answer is, when their spirits are no longer eclipsed by matter, and when they have finally purified themselves enough to be able to approach God, then they will see and comprehend God. Kardec's notes. The inferior nature of their faculties makes it impossible for human beings to fathom God's innermost nature. While humanity is in its infancy, people often confuse God with God's creatures, imputing unto God their own imperfections. However, they ponder the nature of things more deeply as their moral sense develops, and thus they acquire a truer, though always incomplete, idea of God that conforms more to reason. This is a very interesting question, because then he follows up here with the mystery of the divinity. And it tells us, the answer says that there will be a day that will have purified enough to be closer to understanding God. But it's very important that we distinguish between understanding and the logic, because our logic is very limited to feeling God. We can feel God's presence, we can believe, we can have faith, but it's the understanding that is quite limited, because the things that we can see and comprehend are limited to expand to God. But he says there'll be the day that as we develop and acquire a truer idea of God, so as we develop, we acquire a truer idea of God. And it also implies to the fact that in our limitations, we create a human form, a humanized form of God, and then we have a hard time dealing with, because it's humanized. But if we understand that's divine, that's beyond, we know that the day will come. And as we develop, as we bring that sense of trueness to us, and we get rid of our own imperfections, we'll be connected to the source. Question number 12. Even though we cannot fathom God's innermost nature, can we get an idea of some of the divine perfections? The answer is yes, some of them. Human beings comprehend them better as they progressively overcome matter. They can get glimpses of them through thought. It's interesting as the questions develop. So first is, can we understand God's nature? The answer is no. Then it talks about, can we maybe think of the mystery of the divinity? It says you have a path to get there. As you disconnect from matter, you will be able to get there. And this question is, yes, can at least have an idea. So it goes from understanding to, imagining, to having an idea of some of the divine perfection. And the answer says yes, some of them. Human beings comprehend them better as they progressively overcome matter. They can get glimpses of that through thought. So we can start to have an idea of God's divinity as we develop. Question number 13. When we state that God is eternal, infinite, immutable, immaterial, one, all-powerful, and supremely just and good, don't we have a complete idea of God's attributes? The answer: from your own point of view, yes, because you believe that in so stating, then you therefore have named all of them. Nevertheless, you should understand that there are things that transcend the intelligence of the most intelligent person, things your language cannot define, because language is limited to the ideas and sensations. Your reason tells you that God must be perfect in those attributes to the nth degree. For if God lacked any of them, or was not perfect in them to the nth degree, God would not be superior to everything else, and thus would not be God. In order to be superior to everything else, God must not be subject to any change and must not be imperfect in any way imaginable. So here are the notes from Kardec, and he makes a little summary for us of this piece. God is eternal. If God had had a beginning, then God would either have had to have sprung from nothing, or would have to have been created by a being that existed previously. Reasoning in this way, we arrive little by little at the idea of eternity and the infinite. God is immutable. If God were subject to change, then the laws that govern the universe would have no stability. God is immaterial. This means that God's nature differs from everything we call matter. Otherwise, God would not be mutable, but would be subject to the transformations of matter. God is one. If there were several gods, then there would be no unity of design or power in the organization of the universe. God is all powerful because God is one. If God were not powerful above all else, it would mean that there was something more powerful, or at least as powerful. It would mean that God might not have created all things, and those that God did not create would have had to have been the work of some other God. God is supremely just and good. The providential wisdom in the divine laws is revealed in the smallest things as well as in the largest, and this wisdom makes it impossible for us to doubt either God's justice or goodness. This is an incredible summary of this first 13 questions. So it's interesting to talk again. We're not talking here about a person, but is this supreme intelligence the cause of all things, that although we cannot comprehend, it makes it a little bit easier to reach some of the attributes and have a God that's all justice, all love, all kindness, all just this intelligence that we can connect with. How do we do that? The only way we can connect to God is by connecting to His creation, by understanding the beauty of His work. We can then understand the source. So we'll stop here for today. Thank you for being with us. See you next week.